Welcome back, boxing fans. So I was just watching or listening to Ness Boxing Voice, and they're talking about the Lomachenko Tank Davis fight. And you continue to get the same kind of people jumping in there and trying to defend and say the most ridiculous shit in defense of Tank Davis. And that's what it is. It's about defending Tank Davis. These guys feel the need. They feel like they have to defend Tank Davis. And the reason they feel that way is because they know, like you and me, that Tank Davis hasn't done everything he should have done. And you can blame that on his promoter, Floyd Mayweather, or you can blame it on the fighter himself. You can blame it on the PBC. You can blame it on Showtime. You can blame it on whoever you want. But when it comes down to it, the fact that Tank Davis is finally going to fight Vasily Lomachenko for his first unification fight, just as he's turning 30 years old, it is literally the best fight of his career. And when people are talking about that this fight is 7 years too late, that it has grown mold, that's not hate, that's a fact. The fight is old. We've been waiting around for a long time. It was years and years ago when people were talking about a Lomachenko Tank Davis unification fight, right? One guy here said that, oh, well, Lomachenko should have been trying to fight Tevin Farmer for unification, not Tank Davis, because he was too young. Again, excuses. Feeling the need to defend this fighter because you know he hasn't done everything he needed to do. And the irony is, Tevin Farmer wasn't a champion when Lomachenko was even at that weight. Literally, the guy who ducked Tevin Farmer was Tank Davis. Literally. Eddie Hearn offered Tank Davis a $4, $5, $6 million contract to unify back at 130 pounds against Tevin Farmer. And it was Tank Davis that walked away from that fight, just like he walked away from a Lomachenko fight. Now, finally, he's fighting a unification fight. And the irony is, this guy hasn't even fought a world title fight yet at 135. I know he's holding the WBA regular super title, but he never earned that title. It was emailed to him because Devin Haney moved to 140 pounds. All the years now that Tank Davis has been at 135 pounds, he's never fought for a fucking legitimate world title. Once again, bringing up the reason why people feel the need to defend him. This one guy just came out and said that who from 135 pounds to 140 has a better resume than Tank Davis? Well, Lomachenko does, for starts. Teofimo Lopez, he does, for starts. But the reality is, Tank Davis's resume, let's check it out. Because obviously that's what this guy is being fanboying about, delusional about. Like when people literally, to this day, still say that the best win on Tank Davis' resume was his first world title victory against Jose Petraza, that pretty much tells you everything you need to know. That his resume ain't that fucking good. But let's look at it. So right now, currently, Tank Davis is 30-0 with 28 knockouts. Impressive. But once again, when you're fighting a lot of fighters that aren't legitimate 50-50 fights, you should be doing that. Because you're the favorite in 99.9% of the fights you're involved in. Well, let's go down. Okay, so we will start at the first fight that actually made him a name. And that was 2017 when he faced Jose Petraza. Jose Petraza, who at the time was an undefeated world champion. Not the best champion at the weight class. There were 4 world titles available, 4 champions, and Jose Petraza was one of the champions, and not considered the best. But that was the one Floyd Mayweather and Tank Davis chose to fight. He went in there and stopped him impressively, and a star was born, literally. And because of that, people's expectations were big, because people saw what this guy was. A super exciting fucking mini Mike Tyson type of fighter. So people had expectations that this kid was going to do something impressive. And that's part of where the disappointment comes from. The fact that literally we've had to wait 7 years before we finally have gotten something that kind of feels like is special. But let's move through. So after Petraza, he faced Liam Walsh in a throwaweight fight, an undefeated UK domestic level prospect who afterwards never did anything and before never did anything in his first title defense. Then he faced Francisco Fonseca, a 19-0-1 Mexican fighter who literally nobody had ever heard of. And since that, the only thing people have heard about him is literally getting knocked out by everybody he's faced. He got knocked out in what, 1 round, 2 rounds by Ryan Garcia. Then he faced Jesus Cuellar, who was 28-2. Jose Cuellar, who I think this was his 3rd weight division that he was coming up to, and this was his first fight at that weight, fighting Tank Davis for his title after getting beat by Abner Mares at 126 pounds. So you lost Abner Mares in a unification fight, and then you moved up to 130 to fight for a world title. That tells you everything you need to know about that level of opponent. Then he faced Hugo Reyes, who at the time was like 39-4 and was a WBA regular champion at 122 pounds. Was never a champion at 126, but somehow was elevated into a 130 pound world title fight. And we haven't heard of him since. Then he faced Ricardo Nunez, 21-2. Then he faced Yuriokis Gamboa, moving up to 135 pounds. Gamboa had been irrelevant at that point. He was old, wasn't ranked by any sanctioning body. They were literally using him for his name so that Tank Davis could move up to 135 and fight somebody with name recognition, right? Because they were on the precipice of making him do pay-per-view fights. So they need to put him in with name opponents that people were familiar with, even if those said name opponents were literally irrelevant. Let's just take a quick look at how irrelevant. So, just to put in perspective how irrelevant he was at this time. And people say, well, he fought some good fighters. Yes, okay. So this was a guy that in 2017 lost to Robertson Castellanos, who literally was 21-12. Got stopped in the 7th round. Ended up facing a nobody, then Sosa. Sosa, who Lomachenko had previously beaten. Sosa, who many people feel beat him in that fight, he ended up scraping by a majority decision. Faced an old-ass Miguel Beltran and an old-ass Roman Martinez to get 2 victories to put him in position to then get a Tank Davis fight, which he got stopped in. Then he faced Haney and lost, and then he faced Isaac Cruz, and basically he's retired right now. You know, the last relevant fight this guy was in was when he faced Terrence Crawford back in 2014. That was a world title fight. Since then, he's never been involved in a world title fight until he fought Tank Davis in 2019, literally 5 years after the Bud Crawford fight. So that puts it in perspective how long in the tooth he was when Tank fought him. Then he moved up from that. Then he moved back down and faced Leo Santa Cruz. Up until the Petraza fight, this is the best opponent he faced. Leo Santa Cruz, who was 37-1-1. But this was, again, Leo Santa Cruz, who had just moved into his 4th weight division. Fought literally 1 fight at 130 pounds for Tank Davis's vacant title. So, earned a vacant title at another weight division, his 4th weight division. So now he's a 4-weight world champion. And so Tank Davis used him to do his first pay-per-view fight coming off of Gamboa. You can see the idea behind it. No one's blaming the promotional company. He was smart. You give him a name opponent like Gamboa, and then you have him face Leo Santa Cruz in his first pay-per-view fight. But literally, nobody was predicting Leo Santa Cruz to beat Tank Davis. This was a guy who was in his fourth weight division, had no power at 126, so he was never expected to do anything at 130 pounds. And the guy he won to win that title against wasn't even a top 15 ranked opponent. He was literally a cherry pick, and Santa Cruz looked crap against him, almost ruining the fight between him and Tank Davis. Then after that, he moved up to 140 to face Mario Barros for a fucking WBA regular title in a fight that meant nothing, because Mario Barros wasn't a big name. He wasn't one of the best fighters at 140 pounds. You're literally moving up to challenge for a three-weight regular WBA championship. Literally, that's what Tank Davis was accomplishing at this point, because he'd won the WBA regular title against Gamboa, and now he was moving up to face Mario Barros for the WBA regular title at 140. So he's the only three-belt WBA regular champion in literally history of boxing. But they know that fans are so casual, even if he just has regular titles, people are going to be ignorant of that. And Tank Davis's fans are nothing if not ignorant. So after beating Mario Barros, then he ended up facing Isaac Cruz as a replacement opponent for Rolly Romero. Rolly Romero, who fucking was a bum. Literally a bum. The only reason he was getting the fight is because he was such a loudmouth fucking schnook that everybody literally wanted to see Tank Davis knock his ass out. And then because of a SA charge against him, Isaac Cruz was put in as a replacement opponent. Isaac Cruz, who was 22-1-1. Then Rolly Romero was next, 14-0. And of course got knocked out just like everybody wanted, just like everybody expected. So right there you think about what he did in those fights. Gamboa, Cruz, Barrios, Isaac Cruz, and Rolly Romero. Out of all of those fighters, one of them is a future Hall of Famer in Leo Santa Cruz. One is an old man. One was an unknown fighter. Well, basically two. Mario Barros was basically an unknown fighter as well. So Barrios and Cruz were basically unknown Latino fighters. And then, of course, Rolly Romero, who is just a fucking, literally a bum. And after that, then he faced Hector Luis Garcia, who was a 130-pound champion. So you pulled up the 130-pound champion to fight him. And then you faced Ryan Garcia in what is obviously Tank Davis's biggest fight of his career. A guy who's never been a world champion, looks like he never will be a world champion, is a big name because of his social media profile, more than anything he's ever done as a boxer. And then, of course, his last fight against 18-0, 30-year-old prospect Frank Martin. And that's the thing. Up until the fight with Frank Martin and Tank Davis, nobody really knew how good Frank Martin truly was, because he was literally almost 30 years old and had never done anything in the sport of boxing. Frank Martin had never fought a top 10 135-pound fighter. So it's no so shock and surprise he got knocked out by Tank Davis, because he was a guy that, like Erickson Lubin, was untested and unchallenged at that level. So people aren't surprised that he wasn't able to live up to that level, because he wasn't brought along properly. So of course the result ended up just the way the result was supposed to be. A guy who was untested, unproven, getting his ass flatlined in his first big step-up opponent fight. And this is literally Tank Davis's resume. You got a Jose Petraza, you got a Leo Santa Cruz, you got a fucking Ryan Garcia. And now in hindsight, Isaac Cruz looks good. And now you're getting a Lomachenko. Literally, it's 5 fighters with really any level of respectability. And then a bunch of Latino fighters that were part of the PBC. So they were easy in-house fights to make. And that was the luxury of them. And of course, because they were Latino fighters, and Floyd Mayweather, Tank Davis's promoter, who built up his career by fighting pay-per-view against Latino fighters on Latino holidays to try to get as much bang for your buck out of those fights. This is exactly the reason why he fought those fighters. Because they were trying to make him into a pay-per-view star by building up not just his fan base, but the antithesis, the opposition fan base, the people that want to pay to watch you get beat. Or at least that's what they were trying to do. Kind of like what they did with Floyd Mayweather, right? We know the black boxing fans are going to pay to watch Tank. Now we need to get that extra money in there by the Latino market. So we have to have him fight Latino fighter after Latino fighter after Latino fighter. Obviously, we saw the results of the Frank Martin fight, the first black American fighter he faced, which were piss poor results, which weren't very difficult to fucking predict. Everybody knew that fight wasn't going to do very good pay-per-view numbers, and it didn't, because Frank Martin has no profile, no fan base, and you're not really attracting the Latino market because he's not a Latin boxer. Now, of course, you have Tank Davis fighting Vasily Lomachenko following that up. Literally one of the best fighters in boxing, a 3-weight world champion, a unified champion, a pound-for-pound fighter, and this is obviously the biggest and best opponent of Tank Davis's career. And he's just becoming 30 years old, and that's when he's done it. To put that in context, people used to literally criticize and shit on Lomachenko because he started his professional career at 25. So they feel like, he didn't have enough fights on his resume. Yet by the time he was 26, he was fighting better opponents than almost every single guy on Tank Davis's resume, in Salido and Gary Russell. And then, of course, he went on to do a lot more after that as well. But, it's a good fight. I'm super excited. But let's keep things in context. The only people defending Tank Davis's resume are people that feel the need to defend Tank Davis because Tank Davis didn't do what he should have done. And because of that, he comes under scrutiny. People that try to compare Tank Davis to Canelo Alvarez, that shit's just downright ridiculous. Literally, I heard people in this video on Ness Boxing Voice literally shitting on a Tank Davis-Shakur Stevenson fight by saying that Tank Davis doesn't need to fight Shakur Stevenson because, he doesn't like him. Literally, that's what he said. He doesn't like him, and he doesn't want to give him a payday. Yet these same people criticize Canelo Alvarez for not wanting to give David Benavidez a payday. The difference between David Benavidez and Shakur Stevenson is that Shakur Stevenson is a pound-for-pound quality fighter, unlike David Benavidez, a 3-weight world champion, unlike David Benavidez, a unified champion, unlike David Benavidez, and a pound-for-pound top 10 fighter, unlike David Benavidez. And the difference between Canelo and Tank Davis is that, unlike Tank Davis, Canelo Alvarez has already fought a shitload of future Hall of Famers and unified fight belts and won legitimate world titles and earned pound for pound. But people still want to compare, even though it weakens their argument. It doesn't help their argument. It literally weakens their argument. Whenever they try to compare Tank to Canelo, it literally makes Tank Davis look even worse. So they don't even understand that by trying to make this comparison, they're literally hurting Tank Davis. because that's who you shouldn't be comparing Tank Davis to. You should be comparing him to maybe the guys that were in and around his group, right? The Lopez's, the Haney's, the Ryan Garcias. If you did that, now the argument is not so ridiculous. Now the argument is far more credible. Tank Davis's resume compared to their resumes are pretty similar. Devin Haney's got a couple good wins, but he doesn't have the best resume in boxing. Lopez has a couple really good wins, but then, of course, doesn't have the best resume or results in boxing. Ryan Garcia has a few good wins, but never really done anything legitimate, except for, of course, a drug-induced victory over Devin Haney. So now, of course, Tank Davis's resume and his career starts to look much better because you're comparing him with fighters of his time who also haven't done that much and are held to scrutiny because of the lack of what they've actually done in the sport of boxing. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Leave your comments behind. Remember to like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you next time. Peace out. And if you want to see this whole video, you should go check out the Boxing Voices video, and you can hear all of this for yourself.